Hello, everyone. Welcome to part two of my conversation with Preet. In part one, which you should see in your feeds right now, we covered the new front office hiring news. We covered some of the Miles Turner rumors, as well as our biggest highs and lows throughout the season. In this part, we're going to talk through our player grades, give rationale behind why each player graded out the way we did, or the way we graded them, and then as well as whether we think they should return to the Hawks. Then we also touch on some draft news and some different draft workouts and who we prefer at 13 or 22. At this time, I'm going to prompt you to look at the description. Okay, we got a link in there that will sort of assess how the fan base feels about each particular player. I'll ask you player grades. I'll ask you if you want the back on the Hawks. Now, I'll give you a chance. You can either decide to listen to the episode first, listen to our rationale, come back and figure that out. Or if you feel confident, you feel like you have a good feel for how each player performed throughout the season, just go ahead and fill it out. Would love to get everyone's thoughts on this so I can get an idea of how the fan base feels in general, and then we'll revisit it in about a week. Hope you all enjoy. If you didn't listen to part one, definitely recommend you go back and listen to that. His quick trigger, the sort of ghost screens, the drag screens, like he brought a lot of value as a shooter. And so, with that preface, we're going to move into the sort of the player grades, and I want to ask. We're going to go through every player on the roster, give them a grade, say if we think they should stay or if they should go. And I want to start with Dyson. For me, I mean, no notes. Of course, there's things you want him to do to get better. Like no one has a perfect season. I think the biggest thing for him is trying to make sure he's more consistent aggressively as an offensive player. Like he's not always gonna, I'm not asking him to shoot 37, 38% from three, but he can control his aggressiveness. And we could take a look at some of these, like the advanced stats. He took a lot, of course, the defensive playmaking is off the chart. Like he's a 99th percentile in stop percentage, steals, deflections, whatever it may be. The potential assist was really important to me too. Like he's averaging almost 12 potential assists per 100, and that's in an off-ball role where he would facilitate sometimes with Trae off the bench, generating a lot of rim assists. The 3-point attempt volume probably has to go up. Like he's just in the 4th percentile relative to his position. But he carried a huge minute load in usage. Like the amount of time he had to spend chasing guys while also running offense for the bench. I was super impressed with his conditioning. And so like I really can't give him any other grade above or below A. Where are you at with him?
Yeah, so I did the grades in preparation for this. He's actually the only player all season that I would give an A to. Jalen would have fit the bill too, but he just naturally the injuries kind of I have to thank him for that. But this is the one player on the Hawks that I think exceeded expectations that you could have had. The defense was much better than I think anybody could expect it, especially from a generating turnovers perspective. I think that's something we thought we were getting with DeJounte, but we actually saw it naturalize on the court with Dyson. And then offensively, I mean, off ball cuts, the floater, he has a lot more to his game than I think people will give him credit for. You hear Dyson, it's going to be synonymous with defense, but I do legitimately think that there is an offensive breakout capable of happening. Will he ever have the pull up shooting numbers? No, probably not. That's not in his bag. I don't expect him to get there. But you saw over the course of the season that he wasn't hesitant on the catch and shoots. He saw the lanes. He cut. He pulled. He had a quick trigger. Like everything you want to see out of a 21-year-old naturally get better in the season. And I think he's one of the few players that totally exceeded my expectations that I had.
Yeah, I think the only notes I'd have for him is like the free throw percentage. Definitely got to get that up, and he has to get more aggressive at the rim. So what you'll notice is he has a very high short mid range attempts, and that's basically floaters. And I thought more often than necessary he would concede a floater instead of going all the way to the rim. Now he's not bad on floaters by any means; like, he has great touch, but a floater is a 42 to 46% shot. You get to the rim, you're talking about 60 to 65%. And then you also have the ability to draw fouls. You'll notice his free throw attempts is very low, 1.9. That's my only notes for him. Otherwise, like I was exceedingly impressed. Again, like I think the load alone, the fact that he was that impactful defensively while also being at least somewhat of a positive offensively. Like you can see that the Hawks he had a plus 0.2 on-court net rating, and the Hawks were better with him on the floor versus when he was off. Offensively, now, the defensive stuff is more so about the lineups, the guys he was paired with. He played a lot of minutes with the bench. George Niang kind of dragged it down a little bit. But I think without a doubt, like I'm in full agreement with you. He's the guy that deserves an A. Where did you end up landing on Jalen Johnson?
Yeah, so I gave Jalen here a B plus. I mean, and my biggest knock is just the games played. It's tough. He suffered a bad break. You really can't do much about it. But naturally, I think he was excellent. My hope would be is that this season and coming into next, he comes in with a little more half court scoring. I think there's still far too much pressure on Trae to just be the sole option in the half court. He's
Yep.
got to generate all the looks for everybody. He's got to create looks for himself. I need Jalen to kind of just be a threat where he's attacking mismatches. He's attacking closeouts. He can do everything, and not as much be relying on just transition buckets and in the open floor. But I mean, he had the leap that we were all hoping that he would have once the usage rate of DeJounte went out during the off season. So I can't be too mad at him. Just the problem is the injuries. It's starting to get a little worrisome that he might have some sort of negative history, even though I know he's got some freak incidents. But the hope is he puts it together and we can go because he was a legitimate all-star candidate in my eyes.
For sure. I'm in agreement too with the half court creation, both for himself and others. So, I mean, his playmaking numbers aren't bad by any means. He was generating all these percentages are relative to position, right? So, like he was in the 99th percentile among forwards in rim assists, and that's super valuable. You see interior passing. I mean, we saw it last night with Chet and Isaiah Hartenstein. It's super consequential because those are the highest percentage looks in the league. The defensive playmaking, I thought the rebounding was really good. The one thing though is like his creation for himself. So you see here, like this is his creation true shot attempts, which is like out of ISO, pick and roll, ball handlers, and post ups. He was taking about 4 of those per game, which probably needs to get a bit higher, but he was very inefficient on those. Now, those are harder shot attempts, which is why he's in the 51st percentile. But if you're going to be a true all-star, a true secondary creator, that needs to be higher. I thought he was pretty impactful at the rim. You can see here that teams or opponents shot 7 field goal percentage worse when Jalen was contesting them at the rim. And yeah, looking at the counting stats, very similar things to Dyson. Like his overall shot profile, like he got to the rim, but these free throw attempts need to go up and these short mid-range attempts need to go down. When you shoot 72% at the rim and 37.2% from the short mid-range, you've got to up those frequency numbers because, you know, it's just a much bigger difference if he's going to get there. So I think the next guy I want to talk about is Onyeka. So I know we didn't mention for those two guys, like we want, I meant to say we should say like we want them to stay or go. I think Dyson's like, I wouldn't trade him for anyone outside of like a top 5 player at this point. Jalen, I want him to stay. I would hear offers, but I wouldn't be shopping him if that makes sense. Are you on the same page with that?
Yeah, actually, Dyson is my lone untouchable on the roster. Jalen is a 90% I want to keep, but if you told me there was an upgrade out there for a Giannis or somebody, I would listen to the offers and explore them. But again, I wouldn't be actively shopping to move him or anything.
Yep. Okay. And we'll get to the elephant in the room, which you just said about the only untouchable on the roster. But the next guy I want to talk about is Onyeka. I gave him a B+. I thought that I didn't have any like gripes offensively. I thought he increased the 3-point attempt volume. It wasn't super consistent, but he was taking at least 2 or 3 per game. I was very impressed with his development as a passer. I felt like he was able to find Dyson like a backdoor cut at least once per game, if not twice. He was very, very well adjusted to playing out of the hub position. I think the biggest thing for him is like defensively. Now, you mentioned earlier in the pod, you were saying that he was asked to guard on the perimeter more often. And I think you see that reflected by the numbers here. So if we zoom in, right, he only contested 8.9 rim shots per 100 possessions when he was on the floor. And that's a very low percentage for a center. And again, that's somewhat of the Hawks defensive scheme. They're okay with him being drawn out. I think ideally he's had better rim protection seasons in the past. I do think, you know, he has lost a little bit of verticality, I think, from the toe injuries. But ideally, you want to try and keep him a little bit closer to the rim, especially if Dyson's on the floor. And then maybe we'll see these numbers go up. Outside of that, I mean, I think some of the finishing stuff wasn't as good as years past. Like in the past, he shot 75% from the rim. This year, he was at 70.2%. So we can look at like even the 2024 season, he was at 74% at the rim in that season. So he took a bit of a step back, but you got to remember too, like the spacing wasn't as good. Like as streaky as Saddiq Bey was, or even DeAndre Hunter, those guys were more respected as shooters by defenses than this particular iteration of the Hawks team. So Yeah, that's my thoughts on him. Where'd you end up with that grade on him?
Yeah, I actually had the same grade, B plus. I'm a
Mm,
big Onyeka fan. I think he once they changed him and inserted him into the starting lineup, I think you really saw what you were hoping for when you drafted him sixth overall. Like you said, he's a he's a guy that you can put the ball on and let him operate as a hub, find backdoor cuts, kind of be that DHO hub for Trae or and hopefully moving forward Dyson, Jalen, and even
mm,
maybe Kobe Buffkin if he ever gets on the court enough. But naturally, I think the biggest thing for me with Onyeka was, and you see this as you got into the games like 70 to 82, is he stretched from not only just being a corner 3 point shooter, but also
yep.
being above the break. I think even in the Heat playing game, he hit one on the
Hmm.
top of the key. Like if you're going to be this stretch big that we hope you to be, we need you to be able to space from all parts of the court, not just be decked out in a corner where
Yep.
they're going to be asking you to shoot and forcing you at a higher volume. So naturally, I thought that was a great step. And then defensively, I think, yeah, like he's never going to be the anchor that people hope. But the idea is that if you have this help side four and Jalen,
Hmm.
Gueye, that naturally that you'll be able to kind of craft a good defense. And I think, like I said earlier, to start off the pod, like the numbers with Jalen and him are usually good. I'm sure the numbers with him and Mo are going to be good too, as Mo continues to impress. So I'm good giving him the keys to with finally having a healthy offseason too, for him to just be the starting center next season and keep him.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. I think it's not a great thing that he has to be or like he's most reliable as a defender with those guys next to him, but I think it's just a reality, right? Like when
Yeah,
he played without Jalen Johnson or Onyeka, they were looking at a 113.6 defensive rating, which is actually a little bit above. Oh, sorry, I read that wrong. I'm looking at. I thought that was okay. Let me get y'all the right numbers, and then I'll share the screen too, so y'all can see it. Um, when he played without Onyeka or Mohamed Gueye or Jalen Johnson, you were looking at a plus 118.9 defensive rating, and they were 3.8 points worse than league average in those minutes. When you look at him play with Jalen Johnson, they were slightly above league average defensively. When he played with Mohamed Gueye, they were dominant defensively, but a lot of that is because later in the season, Mohamed Gueye also he was like as raw as he was offensively, he was legitimately impactful defensively. And again, it's a smaller sample size than it was with Jalen and Onyeka. So yeah, he's a little bit more dependent as a defender than you like from your anchor big. But I think that's again why you're gonna have to look to see if you can get a different type of big man in this particular draft. So where'd you end up on Clint? Because I ended
Clint
up
gets a
giving him
C
F.
plus for me.
You gave him a C
An
plus.
F, yeah. Frankly, I just think he, it's tough with Clint because you got to give him grace for being an older guy, and he's kind
Right.
of Trey's guy. So naturally, I think he's here because that's Trey, and he's built kind of a reputation in Atlanta. So
Hmm.
I think as a vet, you kind of give him that starting spot. But yeah, I mean, defensively, he was terrible. Everything fell off a cliff, and then offensively, we already know what to expect with Clint. But naturally, I just don't think like I think it's kind of unfair to grade him on a scale of a starting center when naturally I don't believe he should have been the starting center to begin with, and I think Quentin
Mm.
kind of just gave him that leeway to start the season when naturally I think it should have already they should have passed the baton on to Onyeka. So
Yeah.
he gets a C from me, but I understand the F grade because he was quite poor defensively this year, and yeah,
Yeah, it's not all his fault. I just think he was incredibly frustrating, and I don't think the lineups deployed were to his best benefit either. Like too often they paired him with Georges Niang, and there's just nothing you
yeah,
can
yeah,
do. Like when we got ran out the building by Miami in February, it's because Clint and Niang were sharing the floor together, and there's just nothing the Hawks could do defensively in those minutes. You just praying that Niang can hit enough threes. I was surprised to see like how much better his rim opponent field goal differential was as opposed to Onyeka, right? Like teams shot or opponents shot 10 percentage points worse when they were playing against Capela. But then again, you see the Hawks bigs were away from the rim more than other bigs. And again, that's a scheme thing. So we'll see how that looks in this season. The finishing is the biggest thing. he was one of the worst finishers in the league. So this is considering like shot types on like cuts or lobs or whatever it may be. He was 6 percentage points worse in terms of scoring efficiency. And if you look at some of the more raw stats, I mean, he shot 62% at the rim, which doesn't sound bad, but as a big man, that's like lower 15th percentile.
Yeah.
And when you consider the free throw percentage as well, and then the lack of playmaking as opposed to Onyeka, I'm in full agreement with you. The switch should have been made. I think it's likely we prior to the season, I would have said let's bring him back as like, the guy off the bench, but I don't think that's the best option considering the free agent options and then what you can do with the pick in this draft. But where are you? Are you okay with bringing Clint back? Do you want him to, or you just want him to sign with another team?
Absolutely not. I'm done with Clint Capela in a Hawks jersey. I'm happy for all he done to change it and be a plug to kind of start that winning, especially going into that 2021 run. But I'm done. I think he's got a one-way ticket to Los Angeles to be the backup center for the Lakers and be a lob threat for Luka. And I think that'll be one of like the first free agent signings you see and hear come in July because I think his time in Atlanta is done with.
Yeah. I mean, even for Lakers fans, I feel like his verticality wasn't there as much either. So I wonder how effective he'll be there. The next guy on my list is Caris LeVert. Not a guy without his flaws, but ended up giving him a B. I thought he stepped in pretty admirably as like a secondary shot creator, and we needed that really bad. What stood out to me is that he was actually really good finishing plays. So you see he's in a 91st percentile in finishing relative to shooting percentage. He was much better as a cutter than I expected. Some of the spot up stuff was really good. Where'd you end up on Caris, and would you want him back in the Hawks jersey?
I gave him a B as well, and I was quite shocked with Caris's play this season. I've kind of historically just known Caris to be this kind of ball stopper. He'll create for
That's
himself,
what I thought too.
Jack shots up, but then starting the season in Cleveland, he moved the ball well. He played within the offense, and surprisingly, like you said, he was much better on defense than I think anyone would have expected. And so naturally, when he came to Atlanta, I was a bit worried that he'd go back to his old ways, but he kind of played how he played with Cleveland. I do think the Hawks could have used him a bit more in that kind of ball stopping nature, not completely to hijack the offense, but they desperately needed his type of creation, and it would have been helpful to see him kind of be a bit more aggressive, especially in the non-trade minutes. But I'm a big fan of bringing him back. I think he'll have a really nice deal. And I was looking on Data Ball, him and Dyson had a 1.2 net rating together. So I think naturally, Hawks fans think like, oh, Trae's on the bench, we're screwed. But I do think that they have kind of a formula for Caris plus Dyson that can kind of survive, that can help you survive through the course of playoff games or regular season games, and then you'll have like the backups with Kobe or another vet, and that 1.2 net rating all happened without Jalen on the court as well. So like, I think the trio of them over a course of a season can kind of keep the offense intact to give Trae the breather he needs, and then you can kind of go from there. But I'm happy with him. I would love to see him get re-signed if possible.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. I think ideally you're looking at a 12 to 15 million dollar number.
Yeah.
I don't know what that competition will be for a player like him. He definitely has value to a contender, so the Hawks might get outpriced, but it seemed like he enjoyed his time here, and I think he has a more consequential role here than he would anywhere else outside of like a Brooklyn or something like that. So I think it could make sense to bring him back. I'm in favor of that as well. You mentioned like some of like the shot creation ability. So these are grenades, which are basically like shots you take with 4 seconds or less on the clock. And sometimes you just need a guy who could just go and create his, at the end of the shot clock, all the movement has died down. He was one of the best players in the league on those types of shots, which again, I think is really epitomizes. He's a bucket getter, simple value proposition. So I'm in agreement with that. What about Niang? I thought the two things I really love from Niang, I thought he brought, of course, the shooting, but I also think he brought like a level of dog that this team didn't necessarily have. Like I thought he was always barking with guys. He was always trolling. Like from where I could sit in the press box, I could see him constantly like looking at the other team's bench, being an irritant. And I thought he was also like a great interviewer at the press conferences. Like it was really fun asking him questions. I think he's a great locker room presence. And of course, shooting is a replaceable skill in the NBA, but his volume shooting and his effectiveness and his efficiency is somewhat rare. Now, of course, it comes with drawbacks. He's big body Niang. He can't really move his feet. He has his defensive concerns, but you're talking about someone who took nearly 12 threes per 100 possessions and shot 40%. And so I think, as your 8th or 9th man, that's fine. You just cannot rely on him, as the Hawks had to close games. And I think that's where, if you're bringing him back with that in mind, I'm not as comfortable. But where'd you end up with Niang, and would you want to see him in the Hawks trade?
Yeah, so I gave him a C plus, but I will say he probably deserves a B just because he's another guy that was over annexed and had to scale up into a role that he shouldn't be playing, but because of injuries and whatnot, he had to play that. I mean, like you said, shooting is a premium. The Hawks had high quality shots, they just weren't hitting them, and so you come in, you insert a guy that will just let it fly at a high volume. They desperately needed that, and he came in and delivered. I mean, he's a great shooter. And I would love to see him back in the Hawks uni, but with the caveat that I don't want him being the backup for ideally for Jalen Johnson going into next season. Ideally, you have someone like a CMB or somebody fulfilling that role, or Gueye probably steps up into it, and then you kind of use Niang as that 10th, 11th man on the bench that kind of just comes in when you need some shooting. You can put him in. But yeah, the defense was quite rough, and having to play him with Clint, and then you're basically looking at a 6'5" mini fridge playing a lot of your 4 minutes or 3 minutes, and it's tough, man. But I think he brings a lot of value, and the Hawks desperately need his shooting. So,
yep, full agreement there. Ideally, I mean, I think he could still be part of the rotation. I think he could be like your 9th guy, but you just have to make sure that you're either going to go with Jalen on the floor, or ideally you'd have both bigs. Like, I think he could be the 3. Cleveland used to do that with him. Now it's more so about can he contain a 3? I think it's very matchup dependent. Certain teams he may be able to get away with it just because he's actually, like, when guys tried to like body him up, it's over. Like, that's where he's actually really good defensively. It's just more so can he contain guys faster than him. So we'll wrap up the trade additions. Terance Mann, we talked about him a little bit. Again, I was very excited with what he brought in the first couple of games, and then I sort of came down to earth on him. I think I can't remember if it was you or Andrew Kelly who was like sort of like push it back on my sort of optimism for him, but yeah, I think it was a rougher couple games for him than I expected. He took a lot of shots at the end of the 4 seconds on the shot clock. The numbers really don't paint out how detrimental he was at times outside of like his net rating and his on off. But yeah, I ended up giving him a C minus. And I think a lot of that, unfortunately, is the contract thing. Like, it's sort of like the same thing with John Collins. Like, John Collins was not a bad player at all. Like, okay, like he had his limitations for sure. Was he frustrated? Yes. But he was also making $25 million a year. And it's like, there's no way he should have ever been given that much money. It's not his fault he's given that money. It's not Terance Mann's fault. He was signed for 4 years, $64 million or whatever the amount is. And I think, unfortunately, he's, again, just overvalued, and he's sitting on the Hawks roster as sort of like a dead cap, especially if you're going to be considering Kobe Buffkin as like your 3rd guard, and you already have Dyson. It's like, is Terance Mann now the 4th guard? And now you're paying the 4th guard $18 million. Also, V. Krejci, who is better than him, is also on the roster, who's also probably better as a 4th guard. So I think it's less about, yes, it is some of the play style stuff, but also just like where he relates to the rest of the roster. But I think we're kind of trapped with him. I think, again, like to your point, you probably have to attach a pick to get off that contract. Where'd you end up with that grade? And do you want it back in the jersey? I assume not, but
yeah, he got the lowest grade of the season for me at a D, just because, like you said, I just think the contract is a negative. When you could have just had Bogey's expiring coming in and just kept a good locker room guy. I don't know who was behind this trade that kind of extended that cap space hold for longer.
Yeah.
But naturally, I just think, like you said, I was optimism at first because he came in, he was hitting open threes, he was defending a little bit, and then I think it just fell off a cliff. And naturally, I think when you have vets on your roster like this, like, they're great to the locker room, but I do feel like coaches tend to rely on them a bit more and will kind of give them those minutes over a young guy. And personally, for me, I think the Hawks should draft a wing. There's plenty of wing options in this draft, so I don't want him on the roster to potentially block someone from getting minutes when I just don't see there isn't much development coming in from Terance Mann at this point. So it really is just a locker room contract at this point, and I'm just not sure how valuable that is. So he got a D. Hopefully we can get off of him in some sort of deal, but I find that hard to believe.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially your point about guys closing it out. I think there was a lot of frustration from Hawks fans about like Niang closing games or Levert closing games over someone like Zaccharie Risacher. And I get it. Unfortunately, like rookies aren't typically good, and in those higher leverage minutes, it could be a little bit rough. The sort of counterpoint would be, okay, he can't figure out how to be effective in those minutes if you don't give him those chances. And I think that's something that when we think about Risacher, which we'll talk about next, like how detrimental will that be for his sort of development, right? Because when you look at minutes played in the fourth quarter among the Hawks, I wonder, actually, before I say it, where do you think he ranked in terms of guys who played, rotation guys? Where do you think he ended up ranking in minutes per game in the fourth quarter?
By the end of the season, I would guess fourth or fifth. I'm just not sure that there was enough wing minutes. He probably played a bulk of the wing minutes when he had no business being out there.
So, in terms of fourth quarter minutes, average minutes per game, Zach was 14th, which is kind of crazy. Like it's the number one pick. This is a guy that, for the most part was a positive factor. But you saw like Terance Mann, for example, averaged 7 minutes per game in the fourth. Karlsberg averaged 7.7. Niang averaged 6.6. And so, and not to say they were bad players or they weren't the right decisions in that moment or for that game, but that's just a good example of what you said about the amount of
Where's
time.
Man ranked? Sorry, I think I misinterpreted your question. I was ranking Man in the minutes, not Zach.
Oh, my bad. Yeah, I was talking about Zach.
Yeah.
Yeah, Zach. Man he was seventh.
Seventh.
Yeah,
it's a lot for what you would hope to be your 11th or 12th man on the bench.
Yeah. So I think I definitely want to ask you about Risacher. So I thought my initial evaluation with the number one pick, like I was very much so a proponent for Alex Sarr, and then the reports came out that he didn't want to work out for us. I was going to tell him, look, that's tough. Come play to Atlanta. He also played at Overtime Elite, and so it's like, the city. Risacher, I thought I had a very good handle on who he was, coming into the season. I was like, okay, this is a guy who's going to be at the very least, complimentary 3-and-D player, great shooter, if he is streaky. And those first 12 games, yeah, man, he was streaky. And he was so streaky and so bad in those first 12 games that it tanked his true shooting percentage for the rest of the season. But if you look at the last 60 games, he was incredible as a shooter. And I think that's more so of who he is at this point in his career. I think what's a lot of areas for growth for him in general, like he didn't get a ton of creation looks. The defense was impactful and he was very eager defensively, but it wasn't always like the best of result. Like, for example, you see like for a wing, he contested a lot of shots at the rim. And I thought that was important because as he gets stronger and better with his timing, that's going to be much more impactful of a skill for him. I thought he'd be more disruptive. He was right around league average in deflections, below average in steals for his position. I ended up giving him a B-, and I think it's very hard for rookies to be impactful. And I thought he was relatively impactful, which if you look at the numbers, they won't necessarily back that up. Like he had a negative on-court rating. And I think some of that's more so about the guys who came in for him, like Karras, had a very good impact for the Hawks. Niang, of course, with the shooting, had a big impact as well. I think the next steps for Zach is like, of course, you got to continue to be more efficient as a three-point shooter, but the rim efficiency has to get a lot better. He shot 61.2% at the rim. Not bad for his age or his frame, but with the amount of volume that he was taking, it has got to be a little bit better. But where'd you end up on that grade for Zach? Well, I think you're muted, bro.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, looks like my audio cut out, but we're good. Okay. Risacher, I gave Risacher a B because I think, funny enough, Risacher, he really surprised me with his ability to finish at the rim. I wasn't expecting that, just given his size and length. I think he naturally was going to struggle at the rim, and I think over the course of the season, you really saw him get to the rim more. Yep. I also give him a B because one of his strengths, and I noticed this when I was watching his tape in France too, but he's always moving. He's looking for the soft spots in in the defense. Yep. He's finding length. He's finding areas where he can be of value, always cutting, always looking. And the Hawks have naturally over the years struggled with kind of having someone on the ball where everybody's just ball watching Trae while he dribbles. Yep. Whereas Risacher he's always looking for the seam. He's looking for areas to go. And so I thought that was a great, like you said, the shooting, I think over the course of the season, it kind of naturalized into what we like to see him as a shooter with the volume. But I do think it is a bit worrisome that in both as a prospect and now he's kind of had some streaky hot periods with a lot of cold too. So you don't know, is it really like a prolonged period of strength versus, or is he actually a good shooter or is he just kind of in a hot streak? But I do think the sample size was large enough that you can kind of say that he is a good shooter. He's got the volume and that naturally he's going to be a good shooter moving forward. It's tough. The B is because I just don't know how you take a number one pick that has zero ability to kind of create his own offense. I will say the passing chops were there much more than I expected, but
facts.
To put the ball on the floor, I just don't see how he does that, and I don't exactly see that getting better. The handle is quite rough, and you saw when he had to bring the ball up at times, teams were ripping him instantly. It just wasn't something he was comfortable with, and I'm just not sure that that's an area he'll improve much of.
I think that rookies get a bad whistle, and adjusting to NBA physicality is a tougher than it's easier said than done. And I mean, you saw guys' eyes light up when he brought the ball to the floor. They start rubbing their hands together, and they know they're about to come and take it from him. And I think all your points about the movement shooting though is really important because when you play a movement style offense or a very up-tempo offense, the open court ability, the ability to find those seams, and also playing random, and those are all things he's really good at. As he gets stronger, as he gets more consistent, hopefully, then those will be even greater strengths for him. So I like that. And we'll speed run some of the guys that are like a little bit lower on the depth chart. Starting with Vit Krejci. I love Vit. He clearly loves playing for the Hawks. He did not have an easy path to the NBA. He had to grind his way through the G League. I ended up giving him a B. Somewhat similar to Niang, I just feel like he was overextended. Like we were asking him to guard wings, forwards, and he could not do that. It's just like he's a very slight guy, but he's also a very creative offensive guy, similar to the way of Zach, where he's finding these seams, driving closeouts, making these really flashy passes and these nice sort of secondary ancillary moves. But I think that we were asking a little bit too much for him as like a wing defender versus a guard defender. And so I think I would love to keep him as that 3rd/4th guard, a guy who can maybe he's a little bit overextended as running the offense, but a really nice off-ball guard. And hopefully he can also bulk up a little bit. But would you end up with Vit? And do you think he should remain a Hawk?
Yeah. So Vit I gave him a C+. I think he's a nice connective wing, but similar to kind of some of the people we've talked about earlier, I think when he's had to scale up in a role, that's where he kind of really struggled. And you're naturally putting him on the court with worse defenders, and it kind of became a little bad part in the second half of the season when naturally you have Vit out there, you have Niang out there. I think it was just far too many play finishers on the court when the Hawks just needed a lot more half-court offense. So, but I would say, I mean, for a guy that's on a 2-year, $8 million contract, or 4-year, $8 million contract, maybe $2 million a season, like I think it's a quality player to have on your back end of the bench that can give you minutes. He can play some backup point guard. He can be a connective wing, play with alongside Trae. And surprisingly enough, like I didn't think Vit would actually shoot as much as he did and just have a willingness to shoot. So over the course of the season, like it was nice to see that. I think he's fully bought into the team. He seems like a great person to have around. So I'm fully on board on having him back. I just wouldn't hope to rely on him as a primary backup. Like I think last season there was probably a battle between him and Bufkin to see who was going to be it. And I just don't think that you can go into the season expecting either to be that and just hope that one of them comes up. I think they probably need to add a third person into the room to be a bit more competitive.
Yeah, I get that rationale for sure. And I think the vision for him is there aren't a lot of slight off-ball guards that have success in the NBA unless you're a very high-volume three-point shooter. And halfway throughout the season, it felt like he kind of took the Garrison Matthews role. Like he was getting up threes at a high clip. And if that's going to be the path he takes, then I think he could be a viable bench guard because he will have the shooting stroke and the volume to justify his slight frame. Well, like also the transition and the secondary playmaking. Or he's going to have to bulk up. And he's going to have to be a lot stronger, which, again, he's never been that big in his career. So it's a little bit less likely of an outcome. I think that's fair for sure. His counterpart, Garrison Matthews, I've got him at a C minus. I don't think we should retain him. I just think he's a limited player, so I'm not faulting him for the season he had. I think like if you're asking Garrison Matthews to come in and hit a couple threes, cool. If you're asking him to play 20 minutes a night, what are we doing? And so that's where I landed on him. What'd you end up giving him as a grade, and what do you think about his future with the Hawks?
But funny enough, I didn't grade him because I forgot about his minutes at the by the second half of the season. He was an afterthought, right? But I mean, people know my thoughts on Garrison Matthews. I absolutely hated seeing him on the court. I think people love the shooter that he is, but it's only nice when you're actually hitting shots. When you're taking bad contested threes, like there's some value in having someone that can space the floor like that. But once those shots stop falling and you have no value on the court, you're not a playmaker. You don't create for anybody else. You're a bad defender. What's the point of having that type of player? So naturally, I think that's someone they shouldn't bring back. I'd rather see those minutes go more. I think the bench minutes should tilt more towards defense and kind of younger guys, just any type of upside that we have. So like you said, I'd much rather see those minutes go to like Leader as his counterpart, who was kind of getting those shots up in that same role, but at least he's longer, can offer some sort of connected playmaking. I'm good off Garrison Matthews. I'd not like to see him back in a Hawks jersey.
Agreed. What about Don Barlow? I thought he was one of the steals for two-way contracts. The offense was rough as expected. I thought the defense was worse than I realized as well. Ended up giving him a C+. I still think he's very raw. And I think that, maybe there might be something there, but it's tougher for guys. I think he's going into his fourth year. So it's kind of like he's on the fringe of not being in the NBA anymore at this point, honestly, from what we saw in that game. I think he's fine on the two-way. Where'd you end up on him?
Yeah, I gave him a C. I wasn't going to give him too much bad grades just because that's what you go into the season expecting your two-way guy to be your fourth center on the roster. If you think Mo Gueye can play some center minutes or Jalen's going to play some small ball center minutes, so it's kind of unfair to be like, hey Dom, go play 10 minutes. You got to relieve Onyeka, and here you might have to do it in a play-in game as well. So it's tough. The offense and the defense was tough, but I do think on a two-way, I thought he was going to be one of the best two-way contracts, and I stand by still believing in him as a fourth center or fifth center going into this season. I have no problem bringing him back on a two-way.
Yeah, no problem having him as depth at all. Mohamed Gueye, I thought really made an impact defensively in the second half of the season. I think he was I was ecstatic when we drafted him in the second round because it's this is a dude who's truly moldable. He is a massive question mark. And it's more so about the developmental staff to get him up to speed with NBA speed and decision-making and defensive positioning. He was much better this season in terms of his positioning defensively. He had some standout offensive moments, had some posters, had some big threes, some off-the-dribble stuff that's intriguing. I enjoyed the Mohamed Gueye experience, man. Again, my expectations aren't very high for him at this point in his career. I gave him a B. I would definitely like to see him stay on the roster. And when did you end up thinking about his season?
Yeah, I give him a B, and I think my philosophy with second round picks is I think you either got to swing for the fences and go for the highest upside, or you got to take probably the safest prospect you have on your board and just pray that their floor is enough to be a rotational NBA player. And the defense with Mo Gueye is so enticing. You showed the numbers with Onyeka earlier. That is a foundation for how you build a team around Trae, but also just overall team building and as a whole. I think you play him behind Jalen. You hope in year 3 that he can get some sort of offensive game. That's the big part that I kind of struggle with. I think his hands are a little poor. He'd always bobble a lot of balls. He's not necessarily ready and active for the catch. And you need to be that when you're playing with the Trae Young team. He's always going to know where you are on the court and have the ability to get it to you at any time. So it'd be nicer to see his offensive game uptick in year 3. But yeah, defensively, he makes some plays that I'm not sure a lot of Hawks players can make. They're very Josh Smith-esque blocks that he had going back to the olden days for real. So
yeah, top of the square blocks. His per 100 possession numbers are nuts. We're talking about 3 blocks and 2.5 steals. That's ridiculous. Top 2% of the league in stop percentage, which is steals, offensive fouls drawn, and then blocks recovered by the defense. The rim defensive field goal percentage stuff is crazy. Teams were shooting 9 percentage points worse when he contested them. And you'll notice too, the Hawks forwards have much higher rim defensive field goal attempts than like center, than relative to the rest of the league, than like other forwards. And that's because, again, they sort of rely on their big switching. So yeah, I agree with a lot of that. Larry Nance is the next guy on the board. I thought Larry was like the consummate vet. From the moment that I saw him at media day, I was like, this guy's going to be a great positive influence, whether it's on the court or not. I thought he was very serviceable in the minutes he played before he ended up breaking his hand. He still fits into that sort of hub handoff type of offense. The 3-point shooting was pretty good. I think at one point he was like shooting 65% from three. I think if he's cool with the vet men, I have no problems with keeping him. But again, like, we do unfortunately have an albatross of a contract, and that's Terance Mann. And if you're signing guys to be locker room vets, that's cool. But you got to keep in mind how much money you're paying Terance Mann to essentially do the same thing, unless they believe in him as a fourth guard, which I think is a mistake. So I don't think they can extend a lot of money to Larry Nance. I think he's definitely a positive, though. I gave him a B. Do you think they should retain him, or what are your thoughts on that?
I gave him a B as well. I would retain him, but with the caveat being that I would hope that he's the third center and not the second. I think if you're running him back to be the second center, you're not really diversifying that position. You're going to have two undersized centers, both being asked to do the same thing. You don't really have that much scheme versatility if you're doing that. I think they need to target someone else, whether that's a Rook or like a Luke Cornett type, to be that bigger center option that they can throw against teams to combat. If they need to run some drop against a team, they can do that as well. So I would love to see him back as a vet guy. I mean, he's great on Twitter too. He's always active.
For sure.
It seems like he's one of the best voices in the locker room to have. So he's someone I'd love to see back, but it would have to be in that third center role and not being expected to be the backup. And I think he played only like 32% of his minutes this season at power forward. So it's pretty clear that the team only views him as a center option. I don't think Quinn wants to trot him as a four, even though I think he would do decent as a backup four should we need it. But especially because the shooting numbers last season seemed great. I think he probably shot around like 40% on three, if I had to guess. And his 44%. Numbers, so his shooting was great. I think it's a valuable skill set to have. I'd bring him back on the vet minimum, but yeah, I feel like he's going to bounce for a bigger role on a team where he'll actually be a contender on versus being on the Hawks. But
yeah, he's not washed yet by any means, and I think he had some positive minutes, 63 true shooting percentage. I'd bring him back. Now we're down to Kobe and Nikola Jurisic. I think Kobe is a guy that we're both big fans of. I loved him pre-draft. I still buy the upside. There's no reason, in my opinion, to not pick up the contract, like his team option. You need those cheap contracts. He's gonna have a higher upside, and you know more about him than anyone you could draft, if that makes sense, right? Like all these other guys, yes, you've seen Kobe in an NBA context for a very small amount of time, but you at least have an approximation. You don't have any sort of feelers on what these guys could look like, right? And so I think it makes sense to bring him back. I can't really give him a rating just because, unfortunately, he didn't play enough. Are you on the same page in terms of bringing him back?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm the leader of the Kobe Buffkin fan club at this point. I always post his highlights after every game, and I think, I mean, like you said, you know about what he brings. I think he brings that nice combo guard that you can play with Trae or without Trae. There was a stretch in the season, and I was looking it up on my tweets. There was a stretch in the season where the Hawks, and this is when Kobe was still active, he took over the minutes over Veet, and they had won 7 games in a row where they won Kobe's minutes. So they won the backup point guard minutes for 7 games in a row. And I think, is that going to extrapolate over a course of an 82-game season? Probably not. There's no way that you're going to keep winning the minutes when your best player's on the bench. But it was a nice little plan of like Kobe plays off ball, Jalen starts bringing the ball up more. Then naturally over the course of the season, you saw Dyson got more comfortable on ball too. So like I think there is a plan in place where Kobe can be in a role on the ball, kind of get to the rim, get you those rim attempts that you hope that he was successful in as a college prospect. But then also he's in that off-ball role where he's most comfortable. You have Dyson, you have Jalen. He'll be in that area where he can kind of shoot. And so I'm a big fan of bringing him back. It looks like Dyson took him under his wing. So, I mean, that can only be positives for us moving forward, especially because I think his defense is legit as a guard. So he does all the little things. And I think he adds real value as like a low man too that can kind of be a Derek White-esque defender where you're kind of generating blocks and steals, and naturally that helps for the Hawks in transition offense. So I'm a fan of bringing him back, but they probably will add some competition for him, and it's probably the right move because the injury questions are adding up at this point.
Yeah, he was very active as a defender. His rim defensive field goal attempts are very high for a guard. He had big impacts there. Again, small minutes, but very active in the passing lanes, high deflection rates. Again, no reason to not bring him back. You hope that what he could do in college translates. And they were really good defensively with him on the court. Again, in those very limited minutes, I think he only played 120 or so. The last guy really who's like on the roster or could be considered for the roster is Nikola Jurisic, Hawks draft pick from the second round. Some fans may have forgot about him. And the Hawks basically did not sign him to a contract because he ended up getting hurt. And then he ended up signing with our G League affiliate. He's basically an undrafted free agent, so I'm pretty sure you could just put him on a two-way contract. That's what I would do. Just fill out what he has. He did struggle. He had a lot of flashy moments in the G League, but he did struggle as a scorer and with the turnovers. So he's not ready. But he's, again, a straight line driver who if you think about it, what Veet does for the Hawks, Nikola could theoretically do, but in a much bulkier frame and a more crafty finisher. He's not the level shooter Veet is, but if you think about it in that way, I think he's enticing. And I'd bring him back for a two-way. But what are your thoughts on Nikola?
Yeah, I mean, I did catch some of his work, his games in. I think he played in the second half of College Park season. I started watching some of his highlights, and I mean, he started to look more comfortable on the ball. But I can't really grade him because I didn't watch those games thoroughly enough to be like, oh, this guy has a legit skill set of this X, Y, and Z. But I do think he's worthy of a two-way. I think he was one of those prospects in last year's cycle that a lot of people were hyping up as some guy that can be a backup point guard. It feels like a lot. The consensus was the Hawks kind of got a steal at where they took him in the second round. So for the sheer value perspective of how they used that second round pick and that they don't have one this year, I think it's worth bringing him back on a two-way. I will say, are you saving it for last? Because I think we didn't grade one big person yet. And I don't know if that was intentional.
It was intentional. So I ended up saving, Rayford Trae Young for last.
Trae Young.
And the biggest reason why I saved him is, I think we have somewhat differing approaches to him and perspectives on him. I think you definitely respect him as, the best player on the team, whatever it may be. I don't know if we have the same thoughts in terms of like his performance this season or what his sort of designation should be going into this season. But from my perspective, Trae did underwhelm in a lot of ways. Where I thought he didn't, though, I thought he was exceptional carrying the amount of offensive responsibility they gave him. This was not a very talented offensive team. We talked about it multiple times, but he had to do a lot for himself and others. And you could see this year. I mean, he was on ball at the highest percentage in the league outside of Jalen Brunson, I think, and Cade Cunningham. He generated the most rim assists in the league. And that's what Clint Capela tricking off every possession. Like we just showed you the numbers with how bad he was finishing. This number should have probably been 8 or higher. Potential assists were off the charts. Even when you account for his creation look, so this is like looking at ISO, pick and roll handler, post-ups again. Relative to that, he was above league average on those creation types of looks over the course of the season, and that's while he's dealing with Achilles injuries and all that. The defensive stuff, I thought he was better positionally, but, of course, he'll always have his limitations. I think the biggest thing for him was it didn't look like his burst was there, and that was bad because he already is someone limited as a scorer, and if the screening isn't good and if he can't beat guys off the dribble, then it can get a little messy. Regardless, he was one of the most impactful offensive players in the league. He had a plus 8.6 on-off net rating. We talked about the backup point guard minutes. It's hard to replace that level of offensive impact. But also, like, if your system is just Trae Young, then it's also impossible to replace it. I mean, you see it with the Nuggets all the time. Because they play exclusively through Jokic, there's no one they can bring in to approximate that play style. What I think the Hawks are doing and building towards is that, you mentioned it with the multiple ball handlers, they need to be inching towards being less reliant on Trae as a scorer because it then makes the bench more viable when he's off the floor. But also, he has bought in more in terms of not dominating the ball as much. I did just show you all the on-ball percentage was 46%, but it looked different this year. Like, he had the highest hockey assists of his career, the most passes made, all these indicators that he's trusting the offense more. And I think as they continue building towards that, we'll see better and better results. But yeah, I ended up giving him a B+. I would stay with him. I think you're probably not going to be able to find a team that values him to the level the Hawks do. And the conversations will start if he doesn't sign an extension this offseason, which I expect he won't. And I don't think he should anyways. I think he should see what the team looks like after this season. But where'd you end up on Trae? Thoughts on his season? And then I know you mentioned that Dyson's the only untouchable, but what would you look for Trae if or what type of package would you be okay with moving off of him for?
Yeah, so I mean, I gave him the same grade as you, a B plus. I do think you hit the nail on the head. The value with Trae is that you can put any four players on the court, and you know that you're going to have a functional NBA offense, whether that's half court scoring, transition, whatever the case may be. Trae is going to raise the floor of everybody else around him to the point that you know that you can score consistently with most of the teams in the NBA. I do think in this season, you're right. It did look a lot different. I think he was much more much more willing to kind of give the ball up to his teammates. Where I think in years past, you'll even see like if Jalen was trying to bring the ball up, he would be like, "All right, give it to me. Like, let's go run with me." Jalen would be the first one down the court. But this season, he really ran, he really gunned, and I think it was a great season on the court for him actually, from an offensive perspective. And I mean, and then even defensively, like I think he took major steps in being able to be hidden. You got to part of being hidden is you have to be active in your pre switches. You have to be willing to kind of you have to communicate and be able to kind of make your switches before anybody is identifies who you're going to target. You got to be willing to play in the screen game a little bit and so forth. And I really think that he did take up his level defensively too. Like I know the numbers are never going to reflect it as a good defender, and I would never call him a good defender, but it was a much better improvement in those areas where you're like, okay, he knows his job, what it is as a defender. And then in the clutch too, I mean, this year he made so many turnover saving plays at the end of games where he'd get a knock a hand down on a ball, get a steal. Shit, I think even this season he got a block at some point too, right? So like I think like naturally you kind of see he understands his role and where he should be on defense, and more often than not. I would bring him back for the season if they could extend him. I do think that he is going to ask for the max extension, and at that point, I would. And when he turns down Fonzie's offer of whatever it may be, that isn't a max. I do think that's when you start fielding some calls and being like, okay, what's his value around the league? What's the best offer we can get? I do think the conundrum with Trae is that the Hawks value him as this probably top 20, top 15 player. They're expecting value in a trade package based off that.
Yeah.
Whereas other teams are valuing him as player top 25 or top 30. And so they're never going to get the price that they're asking for. And at that point, you're kind of stuck with him. Can you give that player a max? I personally wouldn't. I would be trying to get him for 80% of the dollar, but that's Andy's job as a capologist, right? This is where he makes his money in the league. So I'm sure that they'll have something. And hopefully Trae looks at this wild precedent set by Jalen Brunson and goes, maybe I will take a pay cut, and I like the team that we're building. But I don't doubt that. And so I would look to be shopping him. The best package to me would probably come from Orlando. You'd have to look at either one of Suggs or Franz. I doubt they would move Franz. So you're looking at Suggs plus an additional pick or two. Maybe you get Anthony Black or a Tristan Da Silva in that. And so I'd aim for a young wing, young defensive guard type of prospect, a really young prospect that has a lot of upside in a much higher skill role, and then kind of go from there. I would say I think Dyson, and I've said this before on Twitter to some people, I generally think that like Dyson is a Jalen Brunson breakout waiting to happen. You look at his numbers without Trae, I think he was on 25-5 on the season, albeit a small sample size. But you look, I don't say Jalen Brunson in the sense that like his scoring will be ever 30 points per game, but naturally just this young player that when he's asked to scale up into a larger role, he'll reach those heights and be able to provide you. I do think if he went the course of the season without Trae, I think over 82 he could give you like 22, 7 and 7, and I would be with first team all defense every year. Shoot, that's a starting guard, and the fact that they could get him on a 4-year, $120 million, a 4-year, $100 million contract, that's something I'd be looking at a lot right now. But yeah, Trae's a good player. I hate that I'm the vocal about moving him, but I just don't know what the price that he's asking for is going to be a tough penny to pay for me personally this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair question to ask. Again, we talked a lot about cap usage, asset management. It's pretty restrictive once you have multiple max contracts. And the Hawks probably will project to not have multiple max contracts, but when you factor in the Dyson extension, Jalen's extension, I think, kicks in this season. And then if you want to make sure you have as much sort of maneuverability around those guys to improve upon it. And I think it's fair to look at the playoffs and say, okay, how can we imagine Trae in this setting? If Trae's going up against OKC, how can we make sure that not only is he insulated defensively, but how can you make sure he's viable offensively with some of his scoring limitations? And I think that's a fair question. I think from my perspective, I don't think we've ever seen an optimized team around him, to be honest.
Yeah.
Outside of the 2021 team, and even then, extreme limitations. Like, that was the worst passing front court ever. Like, between DeAndre Hunter, John Collins, and Clint Capela, they averaged at least assists per game of like any starting front court ever. And now that they sort of figured out, okay, we need to be more versatile. I think I am bought in enough. I don't know if Trae's bought in enough. I know that I'm bought in enough to say, okay, I want to see what this looks like with Trae at the helm. Because ideally, it's not Thunder-esque, but like you need someone to bring these defenders and these multiple positional guys together. Because if Dyson doesn't hit that Brunson outcome, if Jalen, hovers at he may not get to like a primary playmaker, but if he hovers at like, okay, he's a secondary playmaker who can get to his own spots, you still need someone to orchestrate it all together. And it's really hard to get guys who are both positive and versatile defenders that are also great creators for themselves too. Like, that's like one of a million. So Trae is a type of.
What contract are you offering him this offseason?
Yeah, and that's the question. So I think, again, like, and I'll turn to the visualization that I was showing you guys earlier about Terance Mann and just like price comps and like contract values. It's a lot tougher to like think about Trae as like an offensive player versus like his overall impact, right? Because I mean, if you're talking about a top five offense, then it's like, I mean, no question, you gotta give him the max, right? But like guys who are making that much money, typically, like if you think about like in a playoff context, you're looking at primary ball handlers who make around 30% of the cap over the last couple of years. It's Fred VanVleet, Mike Conley, Kyle Lowry, and Tyrese Halliburton. And so Trae right now is at 30% of the cap. He'd be looking, if it's a max, I think he'd be at like 33, 34, 35. Ideally, I'd want to keep him around 30% of the cap. So I think with the way the cap's rising, you'd probably be looking at, I think, what is he at? Like 40 million right now? 44?
Yeah. 40, I'm cool. At 50,
yeah.
I don't know. 50
million is tough. I think he has to work with you because it's like, well, I don't know how he'll approach the negotiations, but it's like there's other ways to make money. But there's also like, how much do you care about winning, and how much do you care about winning in Atlanta? If he cares about winning in Atlanta, then the noble thing to do is to take a pay cut. I think in general, asking players to take a pay cut when the owners are billionaires is stupid. I think that if there was not a CBA, I would never ask Tony Wrestler to save money. But when you think about the stipulations of the league, if you get into that second apron, if you start paying the luxury tax, the Hawks have never at any point had a team worth paying the luxury tax for. Now, were there moves that they could have made? Like if you would have signed Pascal Siakam, or if you would have brought Brandon Ingram, then you go into luxury tax, sure. But they have not had a team worthy of paying the luxury tax. So I'm not going to get on Tony for doing that. But I think you just have to be very aware of the restrictions. So I think if you can keep them 30, 35% of the cap, I think that's fine. But if you're talking about like Jason Tatum's on a supermax, you're looking at like 32% of the cap. These are like guys who are more so like wing shot creators. And the reason why that matters is because, of course, they can get to their spots more. And they're more reliable offensive players. And it's like, I don't know. It's pretty tough because I think even Jalen Brown, who, of course, for a long time, he was making the most money in the league. He's at 33, 34. And like that, we've only seen a handful of players who are making that much. So, and relative to the rest of the league, like he's not generating the value of a 33% of the cap. So I'd want to keep him as close to 30, 33% as possible. I think I'd probably have a little bit more leeway, but it's not. I don't want to be in that negotiation. It's not gonna be easy. Like someone's gonna get their feelings hurt. Someone's either gonna walk out with less money, or Trae's gonna feel like he's gonna be spited, and like he wants to probably be treated like as one of the greatest players in franchise history, which he is. But I think relative to the constructs of the league and the current landscape, you can't put too much money into one player, and you can't put too much money into that one player if you don't have the infrastructure around him to build a contender. So that's where I'd be at. Now there's some other news we can talk about too. So to wrap it up and talk some draft stuff real quick, the Hawks have been somewhat busy with the draft workouts. So it's been reported that they brought in Maxime Renaud from Stanford, who's a guy I really like. They also reportedly, they haven't confirmed if he's came into the building yet. I've been getting messages from Chinese accounts because I keep posting about Hanson Yang, and they said that he has not come into the building yet, but they do intend to work him out. These are the guys that are confirmed as of right now from Hoops Hype, which is generally pretty accurate. Today, Lauren Williams reported that they brought in Asa Newell, Jace Richardson, and also Will Richard from Florida, and another name. But when I look at this list, and we're in agreement here, I am very much so against taking Asa Newell. I don't want to take him at 13 or 22, but I think in general, and I'll show you all the numbers after we talk through this list. He's pretty inflexible as a shooter. I don't buy the handle. I think he's John Collins. If John Collins didn't have like a forward's body, like he's wing size, but he doesn't have wing skills, and then so I don't think he could be a 5. He's someone that I'm much lower on relative to consensus. Jace Richardson is I like him a lot. I don't know if he works for us, but the Hawks were also very high on Reed Shepherd, so it doesn't surprise me at all that they brought in Jace. Those two guys are the biggest names on the board. What did you think about those two? Would you be okay taking Jace? And if you would be okay, would it be at 13 or 22?
Yeah, so I will start this off by saying I am in a big minority here that I think when you are drafting, and this is especially particularly with a team like the Hawks, you definitely just take the best player available. I don't know who the best player is, but whoever you in your scouting department you have on your board, and if that's Jace Richardson in this case, a 6-foot guard out of Michigan State, you just take Jace Richardson, and you absolutely do not draft for fit. I think the biggest mistake the Hawks can make in this draft is they use 13 to try to draft a big man just because they think they need a backup big man. Now, there's a lot of big men I do like in this class. There's a lot of big men I think are worthy at 13 and 22, but I'm a full belief that you just take the best player available. In my eyes, Jace Richardson is one of the best players that can be available at 13, and I know it I will be in the minority on draft night if they do take him, just because I think he's a very skillful lefty guard that has a lot of talent about in the pick and roll. He can play both on and off the ball, which I think is what you'll need in today's NBA with maximizing multiple ball handlers, kind of like the Pacers do with the Nembhard, a Tyrese, TJ McConnell on the back on the bench. I think this is someone that can come in and play, and it wouldn't be shocked of all the guards in the draft. I think Jace Richardson returns the most immediate value as far as impacting winning goes. Now, obviously, Dylan Harper will be better, and I project him to be better as well, but I think Jace is a great candidate for someone you take at 13. If players like Noah, Carter Bryant, others are off the board, I wouldn't mind at all taking the guard. But I know the fan base will erupt if Adam Silver reads the card and it says 6-foot guard out of Michigan State. Oz, on the other hand, he is a player that is not on my board at all. I don't want any business with him at 13 or 22, frankly. I just think, and people know how I felt about John Collins, but I think you hit the nail on the head. He's a tweener, but doesn't have the body of being someone that can play the 5. He might even be undersized as a 4, really, unless he puts on a good amount of weight. I just don't think that that's a player that I would be looking to go for. Personally, I would go for people that can actually help the Hawks in a half-court sense with creation ability, creating for others. I think we need to steer away from these play finishers. Is why another reason I don't have Rasheer Fleming too high on my own personal Hawks board, just because I do think we're a little just too much relied on Trae right now. Jalen's not exactly a half-court scorer. I don't project Zach to be a great half-court scorer, so they need someone with this pick that can alleviate some of those concerns moving forward. And for me, Jace Richardson is a candidate for sure that I would enjoy. Ozza is someone I just wouldn't look at all at this moment.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that on both counts. I think if we took Jace, I would be. There are guys I have above him for the Hawks, 100%.
Yeah.
It depends on who's on the board. Like there are multiple bigs I have above him. There's multiple wings, and those are positions of need, but also prospects that I'm higher on than Jace.
Yeah.
Not just for the Hawks context, but in general. So like, I would be more so. I wouldn't be upset with it because I understand what type of player he is and what he could be in Snyder's system. Like he's 6 foot without shoes, but he also has a 6'6" and a half wingspan.
Yeah.
And that's huge because he could play bigger than he's listed at. Obviously, a very gifted off the ball scorer. My concerns with him is Izzo put him in positions to succeed like all season, which isn't a bad thing, but it's more so like he was never asked to do things that he wasn't comfortable with, and they constantly had him positioned on the right wing, letting him to attack with his left hand. And he didn't do much with his right hand. He didn't get to pull-ups. He didn't get to the rim. He's very left-hand dominant. And that's something that, well, I'll say this too, like Tyrese Halliburton is also very right-hand dominant, and they barely ever force him to his left. So I don't know. Maybe it doesn't matter as much in the NBA, but like I think the lack of sort of variability I saw in his offensive game and the lack of like out of structure stuff I saw from him, although he can do it, it just makes me a little bit worried about what he looks like in the league, because I think he has one of the best handles in the class, but I don't think he has like a great first step or super athletic. So it's like, where does the separation come from if it isn't structured? And that'd just be my biggest thing. I agree with you with Newell. I don't have him on my board for the Hawks either. He's outside of my first round and my overall board, which I'll talk about more extensively probably once I end up like working on the graphics for it. But I don't think he's a bad player. I just think I'm kind of out on that archetype. And I think if he's going to be like a viable NBA player, then it's going to take a lot of shooting development that I don't necessarily believe in, because he doesn't have the high school priors, and he doesn't have like, he also doesn't have the handle to play the four. We mentioned some of the size concerns, so he concerns me a lot. The other guys that I think are big for the Hawks to be working out, Maxime Reynal, very productive senior at Stanford. He is a legit 7-foot pick and pop guy. You mentioned the sort of like ability to create for yourself. He is very adept at like attacking. Or his efficiency isn't necessarily there, but he had a lot of volume attacking off the dribble, and that's important because again, like you need guys who aren't going to be incredibly reliable on Trae. So I'll show you all, just as I continue talking about him, I'll show like some of his clips, because I think the biggest thing for him is like at 7 feet, he can put the ball on the floor. He has size. He has grit. All the interviews I've listened to with him, check out. Obviously, I don't know the guy. I've never spoken to him, but I think he's like as much of a green flag as a prospect as you can get without actually speaking to him. He came to Stanford. He only played basketball starting like 16. He was a swimmer growing up. They basically told him, you're not going to get on the court until you get your conditioning right. And so he's worked these last 4 years. I think his concerns is like, okay, how much can he defend at the 5? I don't think he can anchor your defense by any means, but I think he's definitely a guy who could play next to Onyeka. Like you see the pump fakes here, the dribbles off the drive, the short fade stuff. Exceptionally skilled. I think he's by far the best shooting big in the class. He's very protectable as a shooter with the amount of volume and attempts, his shooting range. I think he makes a lot of sense in the Hawks context, but in the NBA context in general, he was asked to do a lot at Stanford, which is why he averaged 20 and 10. But he's not going to be asked to do that much in the NBA context, and I think he'll be really, really effective as as a pick and pop guy, attacking closeouts, spacing, and I'm definitely in on him at 13 or 22. I don't know where he's going to end up going. Where are you with Reynal?
Yeah, Reynal's a guy I would definitely take a hard look at 22. I know our Twitter Rafael Barlow's been hyping him up as a first round guy, and he's been on top of Reynal from the jump. I think he's got a legit skill set, and I think you see his value immediately when he comes in. 7-foot pick and pop shooter. For all the people talking about Miles Turner for the Hawks for years, you can kind of get that type of skill set from a Reynal. And I think even offensively, like you said, even more skill set because he can actually put the ball on the ground. That's a guy that will be able to at least attack some sort of closeouts and kind of help you in that area as well. So he's someone that the skill set is enticing for sure. That size, that length, the shooting, all things that the Hawks need. And he's in a prime spot at 22. I think you should look at him. And it's actually good to know that they brought him in because that's a play. It feels like they're in the right spot. I know I mentioned this on Twitter like 2-3 weeks ago, but like we have no idea what Anzi Salah is going to look at for in prospects, right? Like naturally when Schenk was drafting, we had an idea of best player available. He's going to do AJ Griffin, whoever, Jalen Johnson. Like he had this track record. We think Anzi from his Golden State background is going to be dribble, pass, shoot. At least that's where my head goes. So I feel like Reynal is someone that fits that kind of skill set that he'll look for. And if it is at 22, I think that'd be a home run selection.
And then some other guys that are more sleepers that the Hawks worked out. You've got give me 1 second. Dylan Cardwell, who I'm actually very excited to talk about him. I'll put it on Twitter mostly, but he's going to be a guy that I think is a big sleeper. He played for Auburn. He was rated the best defender in the SEC, which was one of the strongest conferences in NCAA history. he is legitimately, I think, a top 5 defender in the class. I'll send you some of his stuff, Preet, after we're done. He is dominant as a versatile defender in space, if with his size and his frame. And I think he definitely deserves looks in the second round. I think he'll return top 30 value. And then Isaac Nuges, who is a very non-traditional path to the NBA. He actually is entering the draft after going directly to the G League. So he didn't go to the Ignite. He went and played for the G League. He set the G League record for steals in a single game. He had 10.
Really?
He's very Dyson Daniels-esque. Now, I got some messages from some Pelicans fans who had been talking about him. They put me on him. This dude he's legit. Again, I'll send you some of his stuff too, and I'll cover him on here and on Twitter and on YouTube. But those two guys, I think, is very good signs that the Hawks are bringing them in, because we talked about some of the margin maximizing. The Hawks reportedly have been high on Isaac all season. Now, there have been some front office changes. We'll see. He is very reminiscent of Dyson. Now, he's smaller, but he's a hound at the point of attack defensively. He has good screening skills. He actually averaged more assists than points. So he's not very aggressive as a scorer, but he averaged almost 5 assists per game. So he's very intriguing. Like, he's like a very gadgety type of guy, like kind of like if Jose Alvarado was 6'4" and had a plus wingspan. But yeah, he's very interesting. So those are a couple guys that I'm interested in. I have such a long list of guys that I'd be okay with at 13 and 22. I know we're both not interested. We wouldn't be interested in Newell. What would be your ideal outcome on draft night? Could be trades. It could be both picks at 13 or 22.
I honestly, I wouldn't trade. I do think I kind of have a similar opinion with Brad, and I think trading up is usually bad value. And ultimately, I just don't expect too many teams to be trading down from the top 10 this year, because I do think most of the value in this class sits in that top 30. So once you get to like 15 or so, I think you'll find that most of the teams past that point will be willing to trade down. But in that top 10, I think everybody's going to be, outside of Philly, will probably be happy with where they are. I'll say my best outcome at 13, I think, is Carter Bryant. I'm a huge Carter Bryant fan. I think that's a wing that can come in positionally. I think he'll be able to defend 1 through 4 immediately. And then naturally, as he gets stronger and bigger, I think even he'll be able to guard some 5-2 switching, obviously not full time, but in a switch role, I think he'll be good. And I do think he has a lot more upside than he showed at Arizona. Naturally, I do think that when his minutes started increasing at the end of the season too, that's when you saw Arizona kind of peak and make a little run in the tourney as well. So I do think there's some correlation between his minutes and usage kind of upticking a little bit, with naturally them being a better team. Noah Senge would be the other guy at 13 that I think is a home run. I would say I don't know if it's a hot take, but I think Noah I think he has the second most upside in the draft. And I think, unfortunately, I just don't think he's going to make it down that far. I think by the time he gets to that Brooklyn pick, that he's going to be off the board. And if not, for sure, with the Raptors pick. So if Senge is a guy that I think his frame is honestly insane to me. I think if you saw any player that had like a Giannis-like body transformation, I would bank on it being Noah, just because he's like, 6'9", 6'10", 6'11", huge, broad shoulders. I think he can really fill out and is going to be that real play finishing type of wing that people look for. And naturally, I think his shooting has been progressing all season long. So I think he's a great player that the Hawks should target. And then lastly, I'll give a shout out to my Baltimore brethren, Derek Queen, who I do think that's baby Jokic right there. I think he can give some Sengun type value in the offense. And I think the way Quinn wants his bigs to be a hub, playing DHO, I think he can put the ball on the floor, and naturally he gives you a 5-man or a 4-man that you can play on the court and really get offensive value from. The pairing with Trae is a bit tricky, and I would probably only look at Queen if it was a post-Trae world where Dyson is your full-time point guard. So naturally you can surround Queen with the most long wings, tall players, defensive kind of caliber players, and then run your offense through Queen rather than a Trae. But that's asking a lot for a young kid and he's on the older side of prospects at 20, I guess, but that's asking a lot for someone long-term. So ideally, I'd be looking at Carter Bryant and Noah, but I don't think either player makes it there. So I'll probably go with like a safe pick, like a Cedric Howard or somebody, just a wing that can come in, that knows he got to get up a high volume number of 3 points. Can he defend? And then from there, you kind of go from there. 22, I don't really have a home run selection. I don't think at this point. That's so far down the draft to predict. I guess Reynaud would be one I considered there. My guy was Alex Condon at 22, but he decided to go back. So
Yeah.
Sorbert would be another guy that at 22 I would look at for sure too. But
Yeah, I think you said a lot of things that I agree with. I will say I am pretty anti Derek Queen for the Hawks,
yeah,
and I just don't think he's a 5. And if he's not going to be a 5, I think that's based on his principles. I think it's based on his movement. I think it's based on his ability to block shots, his verticality, lack of verticality. I don't think it can work with Trae. Now,
yeah.
I think in the right context, I think he'll be awesome. Like, for example, one of my favorite fits for him is in Washington. Like, if I was Washington, I would take him 6, and that's with me having him like in the 20s on my board. And I don't think he's I just think he's very situational dependent, and he makes so much sense for Washington because you have Sarr on the back line, and you also have Bilal and Kai Sean and Bub Carrance and all these guys who are bigger for their position and everywhere else. So I think he makes a lot of sense there. At 13 for me, I'm agreeing with you with Carter Bryant. You mentioned Derek Queen's dribble handoff ability. I actually think there are guys who are better than him at that in this draft, and one of those is Thomas Sorber. Like, I've been in on him for a long time. I also think Hanson Yang is getting undervalued a bit, and I think that he is going to be one of the better playmakers from this draft. And so I've spent like hours watching him, so I have a whole video plan for him where I'm going to be talking about why I think he could be the best playmaker in the draft. And that's not to say like guys like Dylan Harper or Cooper Flagg won't be able to do it. It's just more so the barrier to entry for a center is a lot lower. You know what I mean? Like with the screening, all the different things. So I would probably try and get Yang at 22. With the teams that are working him out, I don't really know what his range is. So if I was hearing chatter that he might not be there at 22, personally, I would take him at 13 if Carter Bryant was not on the board or Sorber wasn't on the board. I think him and Sorber are like the bigs that I like the most outside of Colin Murray-Boyles. Like I would take him over everyone. Like he's number 1. But right now, like I think Asengwe makes sense. I think Carter makes sense. I think Clifford makes sense. I think at the 22nd pick, I think Coward makes sense at 13. I think Aduthiero is another guy that I've been looking at for 22. Like he's really special. Right now at 22, you could talk me into Kalkbrenner at 22. It just depends what the board looks like. I think he'll also be a replacement level Luke Cornett type of guy. It's a lot of guys I like in this draft. It's a lot of guys I don't like in terms of consensus. Like I mentioned, Derek Queen, some other guys that I'll be lower on. But I think this has been like a really fun class for me. You know, I was sort of underwhelmed a bit at first. I was like, where are the bigs? You know, like I'm very Hawks focused when I think about the draft. And the early in the year, it was like, man, there's no one, man. Like outside of Marla Watch and Zaccharie, I felt like there's no one who's going to be available. I feel a lot better about it now. You know, like if Colin Murray-Boyles falls to us, like I'm running to the podium. I'm not even giving Adam Silver 5 minutes. As soon as we come up, I'm calling him. I'm like, yo, get my guy. And that's just how high I am on him, like defensively and what he can do offensively. So, man, I agree with you. You said this earlier, and I'd said this in the Hawks chat. This is like a very consequential season for the Hawks in terms of like importance for the franchise, but also like going forward. And it starts with the draft. And that's why it's important that they're getting guys in the room that can help make that decision. Because I mean, we are 16 days away, and the decisions that they make on that night will set the course for the franchise because they need these picks to hit. You have Kobe Buffkin's injuries, AJ Griffin retired from basketball. Those guys, if Kobe doesn't end up being what we both think he can be, and if AJ again like has already not returned on his value, those are really consequential picks that would have made a difference this season and the years past. You know, they might have got off DeJounte faster if Kobe had the more promising season. And so those are the types of things that, could kill a franchise when you're not hitting consistently on those first round picks. They get 2 cracks at the bat. This class is a little bit flat. If you're picking, like, I'm not envious of the teams that are picking like 7 or 8, but where the Hawks are, value across the board. And that's what a bunch of guys are returning to. So I'm excited, man. I'm counting down the days. But Preet, I appreciate you, bro. We've been in here for a minute. Definitely want to let folks know where to follow you at. I don't remember your ad off the top of my head, so if you could give them to them, and then it'll be in the description as well.
Yeah, Preet410 on Twitter. It's about the only place you can find me to talk Hawks, but I'm super happy that David reached out and wanted to get me on the pod. My first pod experience, so I'm happy to do it with no other than D-Lee for 3, man. It's been a pleasure for sure.
Sure, appreciate you, bro. You did awesome. Y'all make sure to tap in with him. This will be a 2-part episode. And then y'all have a great rest of your day, and y'all stay safe.